Hi there. Thank you for visiting my channel. Please do not forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share. I would like to get all the messages and information that I'm giving out there to as many people as possible. Now, my name is Winifred Davis. I have been a shaman, psychic medium, traditional and spiritual counselor and healer for the past 37 years. I'm also an author, essayist, poet, and former spoken word performer, movement performer, I should say. I subscribe to no religion. I believe in universal justice and truth. With the impostor justice of man, there's an exception to every rule. With universal justice, there are no exceptions to its rules. There's no my side, your side to the truth. The truth stands unopposed. Please remember that I'm not here to lead anyone. I'm not here to convert anyone. I don't want to be the leader of anything, and I don't want anyone to lead me. My duty is to my conscience, only to my conscience, not to king, country, parents, or anyone, to my conscience. Because the conscience is the light given to each of us at creation to guide our free will, so we're all responsible for our actions. Now, I am just a messenger delivering a message, and I read because I don't want to miss anything, okay? So do forgive me. It's not that I don't know what I'm talking about, because I don't think I would be able to write my books if I did not know what I was talking about. I just say it like it is, okay? Now, I am just a vessel, a messenger delivering messages from the collective. That's what I chose to do in this lifetime. When I was back in the spiritual world, I chose this at this particular time to be a messenger, a vessel. Now, the collective includes my many guides, members of different hierarchies, including from the angelic realm. Now, consequently, my messages and what I have to say is sometimes harsh, brutal, but such is the truth. And only by facing the truth, looking into our mirror of soul reflection, of self-reflection rather, will we be able to bring equilibrium to our soul. Only by being honest when we look into that mirror of self-reflection and see that image, that reflection that is not a very pretty one, can we do better and be able to move on and advance up that ladder of soul restoration. Now, I am fulfilling my self-soul contract and also my Neptunian journey at this time, my Neptunian contract. Now, once again, I'm not here to lead or convert anyone. Each man must evolve according to his own light. And believe me, in other lifetimes, I thought you could beat the message into others, but then that's usurping their free will and made many mistakes there. I've learned. Now, please do not interpret freely what I say. Say exactly what I say. And if you do not understand, feel free to drop me a message in a comment below or email me. Send me an email and you'll find that email below or on my website, which is also listed below. Now, if I say blue, I mean blue. All shades of blue, not sky blue, not marine blue, not navy blue, all shades of blue. And if I say that a tiny fish, and I always say this, is in a small aquarium, when we freely interpret, by the time we get to the 10th person, that tiny fish becomes a whale, and a whale is not even a fish, it's a mammal swimming in a vast ocean, which is surely not a small aquarium. I deliver my messages as I get them. I can't freely interpret them because then I get stuck. I can't really write because no, right? I have to deliver them as I get them. And if you listen to some of my other videos, as I said, according to my great-grandmother, Aunt Ella, some me get it, some me sell it. So I receive it, that's how I sell it. I don't alter it. Now, I started this channel to discuss the truth that is reincarnation and its facts. At times, I will discuss at length current events as I see relevant to the topic that I discuss, which is the truth that is reincarnation and its facts. Now, this is a very special, what I call cup runneth over, period of greater transition that only happens ever so often. It is a period that seems like the end times, Armageddon, and the apocalypse, and perhaps revelations. It is none of these. Periods like this are always happening on smaller scales. However, for reasons that I explain in my books that are listed below, this is one of those very few and providential ones where we have accumulated so much karma that there needs to be mass understanding, unconditional love, and forgiveness to bring some balance to the scales, because the scales are so out of whack right now. The climate is in crisis, not crisis, crisis. Human beings are in crisis. Everything on this planet is in crisis. Now, I'm going to, in this video, okay, it's a 3-part video series, and I'm going to be discussing the two faces of America. I'm going to be discussing as well the reincarnated souls that we see now in what I call the American Manchurian Regime, and I will be discussing some of them. And also in the 3rd video I will be discussing the repetition of history in either in rhyme or verbatim, and showing in detail how what is happening now and some things that have happened before, how they align with what happened in Nazi Germany. And believe me, you will be astonished. Sometimes or not sometimes, many times, truth is indeed stranger than fiction. However, before I get into the two faces of America, and that is in line with a book that I just published on Monday. I don't have my copies yet, called Two Faces, Cyrus' Bill of Rights, and Hitler's Aryan Paradise. Why America is ground zero in this cup runneth over providential time. Now, I'm going to give you some messages that I received since my last video. I think it was 11 days ago. On March 31st, which was yesterday, today's April 1st. Oh, I think it's April 2nd actually, because it's after 1 a.m. that I'm actually recording this video. The message says, quote, "Look not for a person, but the message. In this cup runneth over period. Therein lies the second coming, not of John the Baptist, but of now. Not the messenger, but the message. I am just a messenger, as I was more than 2,800 years ago in the Levant." It is a time of great revelations, not just in one country, hemisphere, but all over the world. Everyone and everything is affected in one way or another. It is a time when we must take a stand for that which is right. This is the time of harvest, when we can now separate the wheat from the tares. The situation is unsustainable. This is the time. Love, such as that of which Malachi spoke 500 years after Elijah spoke, when the hearts of children return to the Father, and those of the Father to the children. Like Nefertiti, there have been many who have claimed the personage of Elijah. We must be in the understanding of the messenger, of the message, rather. It is not the messenger, but the message. There will be other periods, such as this one in the future. Listen to the message. This message knows no mask of ethnicity, religion, gender, race. For behold, the message is one that has always been from the beginning, and the messenger has worn many different masks as the understanding has grown. This is the time as stated in the records. I am just a messenger, as I was more than 2,800 years ago in the Levant. As we go along with this channel, my channel here, we will see how it unfolds. Now, I've listed my books, as I said, below, so you will see more of an in-depth discussion of what I'm going to be discussing in these videos. And once again, as I said in my last couple of videos, that Muslims in this go-round are the targets. They're the boogeyman for everybody. And we see that. It is plain. Okay? So, that includes Gaza, the West Bank. We see that in the war on Gaza and the West Bank. We see that in all of Western Asia. But I'm going to say, like the greater Middle East, okay, which includes North Africa, and the Horn of Africa. I'll include Pakistan as well, and the 200 million Muslims that are in India. They are under attack, and I discuss that in one of my books that's listed below here. And I often say that America is ground zero. When I get the messages, I will share them with you at the beginning of my videos. Now, please do not forget that there is no peace in Gaza, and the genocide and ethnic cleansing still continues there. And in the West Bank, it's getting very dire. It has now spread to Lebanon, and if permitted, but I don't think it will succeed, to Iran. And if it does succeed in Iran, then it would move on to Turkey and the Gulf states. Well, I've mentioned those for the past 2.5 years. I've been saying that because that's what I see, that's what I'm shown. The crisis in Sudan is beyond horrific. And it's not that it's less important than Gaza, but I discuss Gaza. I discuss what's going on in the Levant because that's what my guides, for specific reasons, which I will divulge at a later date. This is providential, and this is what they want, the war on Gaza. But going back to the Sudan, that's horrific. One shining light, remember now, there's famine, genocide, ethnic cleansing. It's horrific. But because of what is now going on with this war on Iran by America and Israel, some of those who have pursued and contributed to what's going on in Sudan, they're now preoccupied. So they're getting a little break in Sudan at the moment. And of course, Israel is involved in the Sudan as well. Now, remember, all children everywhere, especially in zones of conflict, no matter what side those children are, be it of perpetrators of the conflict or the victims. No child should have to endure the conditions that they have to in zones of conflict because of adults and their forever wars. Now, on the 23rd of March, I also received another message, and it says, quote, "The second coming of Jesus the Christ will not be for the Zionist zealots who have declared this triumvirate holy war, but it will instead herald the rise of the uniter, the energy of Saladin. Muslims shall unite. This shall herald the doom of the greater Israel. It has come full circle, for the birthplace of the hegemony," that's America they're talking, "will become its graveyard." And the triumvirate here is England or Britain, the mother, and America and Israel, the children. And this is all linked to the Suez Canal. That's what this message is talking about. It's all linked to the Suez Canal. And, where France and Britain and Israel again, playing little games and bad cops and whatever, trying to overthrow, I think it was the Nasser government and whatever, but it blew up in their faces. This time America was on the side of Egypt, and that particular adventure was the final nail in the coffin of Britain as a hegemon, and the rise of America to take its place. And then, of course, the overthrow of the Mossadegh government in Iran by Britain and America, because this popularly, democratically elected government decided that, well, how dare they, I guess, decided that, they were going to nationalize their own resources, their oil. Well, America and Britain, of course, didn't agree, so they had, I think one of them had I think MI6, they named it Boots, and I can't remember what the Americans named, the CIA named it. And then they overthrew the government, installed the Shah, and then of course, well, we knew he was a murderous one. And so the story goes. Well, now they're back there. Regime change again. They've come full circle. Let's see what happens. And then, of course, there's a Strait of Hormuz. History repeating itself in rhyme and sometimes verbatim. Now, on February 19th, I received the following message, which I mentioned in one of my other videos. The rivers will run red with the blood of the innocent of the great Persia, as it will run red with the blood of the temptress, that's Netanyahu in Israel, and its hostage, America, as they're locked in a death spiral. What a pity. And I had more messages in there, but I'm not allowed, as dictated by my guides, to mention them at this time. However, it continues. Control the oil, and you will control the world. Unintended consequences await all. And I'm going to add here this Jamaican proverb. Same way puss walk, and on the same way in mouse. In other words, the manner in which a cat walks, it is not in like manner that he hunts for mice. And that's what we're seeing with Iran now, underestimated by its adversaries. If you're a good war strategist, you will know this. Respect your adversary. And if you respect your adversary, you will never underestimate them. Do not judge a book by its cover. Now, as I said many times before, in my videos and in my books, that the Christians were on the chopping block in Jerusalem. There's no Easter celebration this year. They've been locked out in Jerusalem. Now, since the days of the Third Crusade, under the Muslim rule of Saladin, and with agreement with Richard the Lionheart, Christians were able to go to Jerusalem, right? It's important to all three Abrahamic faiths. And it's been doing relatively well. But now, of course, the supremacist Zionist regime, Israeli regime there, their intention, once they got what they wanted, was to kick the Christians out as well as the Muslims. And fools be they if Christians did not realize this. But you know, as they say in Jamaica again, dog, nyam, dog. Dog eats dog. Supremacist ideology and practices is cannibalistic. So now they feel they're well on their way to realizing the Greater Israel Project, because who's going to stop them? No one's going to stop them. So now they don't really need those Christian Zionists anymore. I guess Mike Huckabee and Ted Cruz haven't gotten the memo yet, because basically they are anti-Christian and anti-Muslim. Now, we must understand the mask has fallen. Even before they have fully achieved their dream. So they've already thrown away the stick that helped them go up that hill. And they're not yet at the summit of that hill. Unwise. We must understand that Israel is a friend to no one. They are supremacists of the highest order, the poster child of the supremacist ideology and practices. Israel is the Third Reich on steroids, and I will cover that in a book due out at the end of April entitled Thoughts on the Past. Israel is the Third Reich on steroids, but it is not Sparta. Now remember Jeffrey Epstein and his friends. They believed and discussed, according to the Epstein files, that the Goyim, everyone who was not a Zionist Jew, and most Jews are not Zionists, was there to serve the Zionists. And indeed, Zionists will not die on the battlefield of the Great Persia that they aim to erase. Americans, as usual, as in Iraq, will do the sacrifice for their Zionist masters and their compromised, or I should say compromised, I just invented that word there, politicians. Now, I also did say that Israel would, as they have done in Gaza and the West Bank, destroy every historical and cultural heritage site in Iran, in which they are now systematically doing that. Once again, the Great Persia survived the Mongols and Alexander the Great. They will survive Israel and America. You can follow these messages in my previous videos, of course, and of course the books are all listed below. And I do say the Great Persia. Now Iran would be the what would they call it now? I think it's endemic name, the name that is used by the people in Iran, as opposed to Persia. Persia is Greek, but my guides like to say the Great Persia, and that is geared, or it's like a message to those who would belittle Iran and its long history and civilization, because that's what it was known at the Great Persia. And that's why they always speak of the Great Persia rather than say Iran, because that is for Western and supremacist ears, so that they understand that this civilization goes back perhaps more than 4,000 years, and it has given much to humanity. It has contributed an awful lot to Western civilization. Now, please remember, this is only for entertainment purposes, okay? What I am saying here. And I grudgingly say that. Now, the two faces of America. Now, remember, please remember, that the Native Americans lived in America for thousands of years. They have lived in America for thousands of years. Genocide and ethnic cleansing was committed against many groups. For those who speak of a white America, please remember that America was brown before it was white, or before white appeared on its shores. However, I'm speaking in temporal terms here, but through the eyes of the soul, and that's what really matters. color, race, ethnicity, language, religion, those are just masks. Neither here nor there. They never travel with us from lifetime to lifetime. We're black in one lifetime, white in another, male in one, female in another. I've been black, white, English, Egyptian, North African, and I'm black now. I was born in Jamaica, grew up in Canada. I've been Chinese, I've been Indian living in Gujarat, I've been male, I've been female. I've been all over the world. And I've practiced many vocations. I've been rich, I've been poor. I've been a hobo. So I've been all things. So the masks don't really matter, but we're living in the world that we are, so we have to pay attention as well. Now, America is the only country in the world that can serve and has served as a model, the poster child for both an intolerant, codified racist society of apartheid subjugation and a poster child for a true democratic, diverse, and tolerant society. And why? Because America has two faces, and two faces that has been with it since the arrival of the settlers from Europe. The first face has turned off the light of its conscience and does not care about the human rights of others. It is authoritarian, bent on servitude and bondage, inequality, exclusion, injustice, mediocrity, dishonesty, corruption, greed, and actions that can lead eventually to genocide, as we have seen with the Native Americans, many of them. This is the face of manifest destiny, slavery, Jim Crow, the genocide of Native Americans, and hate. It is the face of pernicious racism that is so pervasive in America that almost 40%, perhaps I'm overestimating here, but I doubt it, of its population are prepared to cut off their noses despite their faces. The fertile breeding ground for cults and extremism. And cut off their noses despite their faces, and I list many accounts of those in my books. We take, for example, America doesn't have health care right now because they thought, well, black people would benefit, and these are facts, these are not conspiracy theories, because they wouldn't want to work. So why have health care? And they would rather see their children not get a free breakfast or lunch because a black child or a brown child would also get a free lunch or free breakfast. That's how terrible it is. When it was ordered that, like swimming pools, integration and swimming pools, were supposed to be integrated. Well, the white Americans, they filled the swimming pools with sand. They even put chemicals and nails in the swimming pool so that black children and black adults would not be able to swim in those pools. So you get rid of the swimming pool so your kids won't benefit, just so black kids would not. Well, I list all of those in the discussion as well in my books. Now, this same face is the Confederacy and the United Daughters of the Confederacy, the Powell Memorandum, and the Heritage Foundation, Hitler's Aryan Paradise. The other face, the antithesis of the first one, veers toward the light of its conscience and is inspired by and integrated with the Cyrus Bill of Rights, representing a pluralistic society that espouses freedom, human rights, equality. It is the face of the Constitution, of honesty, integrity, justice, without favor or fear, where even your enemy deserves justice, as John Adams, the second president of the United States of America, he exemplified when he defended the English captain of the ship, who in self-defense, because they were going to kill him and his crew, he killed some of the people on the East Coast. And John Adams, because that was during the time of the Revolution, and John Adams defended him. Well, he lost most of his clients from his law practice, but he said he had to defend the man, the captain of the ship, who represented the King of England, who was responsible for what Americans then saw as tyranny, but he defended him because it was justice. It was true that he had killed those people in self-defense. He did win his case. So because he says even our enemies deserve justice. Now, that face is also one of inclusion. This is the face of common human decency. And this is what one side in America, the other face, says is woke, and it's DEI, because common human decency for them is woke and DEI. Now, that face has served as a model for many emerging democracies and government. America has always been in a constant battle to keep the face that veers towards the light of the conscience from being overshadowed by the other face that denies the light of the conscience, that of the darkness. It is because of these two faces why America is ground zero in this cup runneth over providential period of great transition. In this video, part one of the three-part series, I will outline the entire journey of these two faces from their birth in Britain to the present day America, as it embarked on what I call a Buttonesque journey back to the abyss. Now, Buttonesque, I'm referring to F. Scott Fitzgerald, Benjamin Button, who aged backwards, from old all the way back to infancy, where of course you would die. But then of course normally you go from infancy to old age, and you're still gonna die anyway, however you take it. Now, since the arrival of the Quakers, the Pilgrims, the Puritans and Jamestown settlers and the slaves they bought, it has been a constant tug of war between these two faces. Now, America is the only country that can officially serve and has served, as I said before, as the model for a truly democratic, diverse, and tolerant society, and an intolerant, codified, racist society of apartheid, subjugation in these times. Many countries have aspired to the society of America's face, tending towards the light of the conscience, a light that America has always been in a constant battle once again from being overshadowed by the other face of darkness, the denial of the light of the conscience. Now, the 1776 Pennsylvania Constitution, rewritten in 1790, among its authors were Benjamin Franklin, is regarded as the most democratic constitution ever written in America. The Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the oldest functioning written constitution in the world today, and the Constitution of the United States represents a large step of the journey towards what could be as ideal a state on earth, inhabited by less than perfect souls such as we are. It was drafted by John Adams, Samuel Adams, and James Baldwin in 1779 and served as the model for the United States Constitution. In the first part, Article 2, the Declaration of the Rights of the Inhabitants of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, of the Constitution of the Commonwealth, affirms the duty or right of all people to worship. It is the right, quote, it is the right as well as the duty of all men in society, publicly and at stated seasons, to worship the Supreme Being, the great Creator and Preserver of the universe. And no subject shall be hurt, molested, or restrained in his person, liberty, or estate for worshiping God in the manner and season most agreeable to the dictates of his own conscience, for his religious profession, or sentiments, provided he doth not disturb the public peace or obstruct others in their religious worship. Now, the face that has shut out the light. Let's look at that one in details now. The other face, right, is contrary in every respect because it does not care about the human rights of others. It is authoritarian, as I said before, bent on servitude and bondage, inequality, supremacism or supremacy, mediocrity, dishonesty, corruption, and greed, and actions that can lead to genocide. Unfortunately, this face has served to inspire Germany and its actions and subsequent genocide in Namibia. This face was one that also served as the model for the Nazis. Their subsequent genocides of 6 million Jews and Roma Sinti, up to 75% of the Roma Sinti, as I discussed in those books. That face was so dark that some of the extreme Nazis thought its practices were over the top. Imagine that. It served as the model for apartheid in South Africa. It is always working with extremists, this other face of America, and especially white supremacists worldwide, and has now brought on board all masks of supremacists without borders. And that I discuss in the book. It's 2 volumes of them, Thoughts on the Past, in what I call the strange bed, the octopus of strange bedfellow. I use that trope to explain how the tentacles have now spread all over the world and couldn't care less about the borders of America. They have not America's interests at heart. But I'll get into that in another video after I finish this series of 3. Now, that face now aids and abets Israel and its atrocities and genocide. And, you think about all the Argentina that it supports and all the right-wing governments and policies that it supports across the world. Now, that face was, according to Adolf Hitler, the perfect Aryan paradise. That's what he said, and that's what he thought of America. Because he saw Britain, America, and Germany as 3 Aryan brothers. And for him, America was the great British experiment when it came to their white supremacists. And Aryan, it was an Aryan paradise. It was a successful one. Now, that face, now today, runs the largest globalized extortion and corruption ring, as it now wields tariffs. And of course, this is a little bit dated now, things change so much in the books, and threats of military intervention to acquire contracts for private American companies and to secure monuments and international prizes. It is also offering bribes to countries to aid and abet in what could become the world's largest human trafficking ring. And that's, sending migrants to prisons in the jungle or to Libya or other places, where those migrants, they don't come from those places. Israel is also following in the same trajectory. So goes Israel, so goes America, so goes America, so goes Israel, locked in a death spiral. Siblings, Mother England, Britain. Israel is following the same trajectory as it tries, in the words of some analysts, to globalize its ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Palestinian people. Now, the final British conquest, now this is the beginning now. We're going to discuss how the 2 faces came about now. The final British conquest of Gaelic Ireland arrived with the ultimate battle of Kinsale. This was between October 1601 and January 1602 of the 9 Years' War, which lasted from 1593 to 1603. The Irish, they put up a good fight against England. It just, every so often it was going on. Under the command of Charles Blount, Lord Mountjoy. It has a very interesting history. This last and deciding battle, a battle in which the 4th Earl of Clanricarde, Richard de Burgh, and he was Catholic, but he was one of the Catholics fighting on the side of England. And that's interesting. Would distinguish himself and earn the name of Richard of Kinsale. England was victorious over the Spaniards and the Irish earls. After this victory, the English forces traveled throughout Ulster and destroyed all the crops and livestock, leading to famine cannibalism. After the death of Lord Mountjoy, the Irish earls, because he protected them even though it was a rout, still gave them some form of protection. After his death, the Irish earls lost their protector, and based on the agreement signed at the end of the war, they left Ireland, most of them for Spain, in what became known as the Flight of the Earls, leaving England to at long last realize its dreams of fully implementing its plantation system in Ulster, Northern Ireland. That fateful Battle of Kinsale would also have repercussions that are reverberating today. Now we're going to look at why that is. With resources no longer having to be spent on fighting in Ireland meant that Britain, that would include the government and its nobility private investors, could concentrate. They would now have money to concentrate on the new colonies, including America and Australia. So in the Americas, the islands, North America, what would happen is that the war was a profit thing, the bounty and the loot of war. Like back then, if you waged war, for example, against the Spaniards, hijacked their ship, and you'd get all their loot that they were bringing in from, for example, South America, the gold, the silver, and all of this stuff. So it was, and usually it's the nobility who would actually take mortgages out on their properties and, use it to invest, and they'd have other investors, and they'd make their expeditions, and they'd go out and they'd wage war. And then, of course, lots of them also lost a lot of their holdings, because then they ran up into so much debt, incurred so much debt. And so it was something. And then, of course, the crown at times would be glad to take away their stuff, and it's just, anyhow, let's get a move on. Now, free to pursue its colonization of the new lands of the Americas, Britain established its first settlement in Jamestown, Virginia in 1607. Now, Sir Walter Raleigh, he was one of the leading figures involved in these expeditions. However, most times he would send his ships, but he remained in England because Elizabeth I didn't really like to know that he was not around in England. So this was followed, after the Jamestown settlers. This was followed by the settlement of the Pilgrims in 1620 in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and then the Puritans in 1629. In 1607, the first English settlers, as I said before, arrived in Jamestown. Now, in 1620, the Pilgrims, who believed in forming their own congregations separately from the Church of England, arrived in Plymouth after having spent a decade in Holland, right? They believed in separation. Later in the decade, so let me just add something here. They spent 10 years in Holland away from Britain because they felt that they were not being true to the scriptures, after Henry VIII had broken away from the Catholic Church and what have you. But after 10 years in Holland, they felt that their children would become corrupted by life in Holland. So they're on the move again. And then you have the Mayflower, right? So later in the decade, the Puritans, who believed that the Church of England, just like the Pilgrims, needed to purify itself of certain Catholic practices, they didn't believe that they had to separate as the Pilgrims did. They believed you could make those changes from within. They arrived, as I said, in New England. Africans arrived in what we call America, but in New York area before 1619. But we'll just use that date, 1619, because that's when really in Virginia they went there. Okay, now here we see the beginning of America's role in this very important period of now, right? That's one phase. So the Pilgrims believed that it was already predetermined who would go to heaven and who would not. So only the saved behaved godly. The Pilgrims, who contrary to popular belief, right, did not wear only black and white clothing and were not of great means. They had a more amicable relationship with the Native Americans, who taught them skills like fishing to help them survive in the new land. On the other hand, the Puritans, who were of greater means, were arrogant, racist, and supremacists, and believed that the Native Americans were uncivilized. Thus, they had just cause, that's the excuse now, to take their lands and displace them. They believed it was a duty to convert others, usurp the free will of others, of course. And they also believed in severe punishment, hard work, the Protestant work ethic, where you are not deserving of, and you did not work hard enough, so that is why you are not prosperous. Now you see the psyche in a lot of America? Good. And they believed in exclusion. The Puritans believed that the Church of England needed to be reformed because it had too many practices, as I said, that were similar to the Catholic Church. Furthermore, they believed that they had a direct covenant with God. That's covenantism, we call that. And were given the authority to bring about those reforms. Thus began America as a proven fertile ground for religious sects or cults of varying degrees of extremism, some even becoming endogamous. And that's like the Mormons. They've become endogamous. Now, indeed, America is a fertile breeding ground for religious fanaticism, extremism, the punishment psyche, supremacism, exclusion, and the obsession with purity. In Virginia, we see the beginning of America's two-tier socio-racial hierarchy. With the arrival of the first slaves around 1619, as I said before, there were and are more sects developing in America because, and it continues even today, because there's always some group that believes the previous one was and is not pure enough or is straying from its roots, in addition to its negative and positive exceptionalism and manifest destiny. Slavery would usher in that two-tier socio-racial hierarchy and the resultant lost cause ideology of the Daughters of the Confederacy, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, and other groups. Added to this mix, you have capitalism, greed, and now neoliberalism, and the different admixtures, including the culture of religious zealotry, self-help motivation industry, and business, as previously mentioned. Okay, these you could call them psychosis, have reared their ugly heads separately at times, and at times shielded by what I call a sheer cloak of invisibility. Now, arriving also in America in the 17th century, in the latter part of the 1600s, was a Christian sect called the Quakers. Now, founded in England in the 1640s during the period of religious turmoil and the clamoring for reform in the Church of England by George Fox, the Quaker sect, would grow to comprise more than 50,000 adherents by 1660. Quaker, okay, so the name Quaker was a derisive nickname because of their shared belief that people should tremble at the word of the Lord. But they embrace this derisive nickname. And that is not unlike the 14 wealthy merchant families of Galway in Ireland, who, in defiance of Oliver Cromwell, what a character he was, embraced that nickname. It was meant to be derisive. 14 tribes of Galway. They embraced it. Even today, it's still used. Now, members of the Quaker group were persecuted and they suffered whippings in England, torture and imprisonment. And they were pacifists, the Quakers, who viewed men and women as spiritual equals. They did not engage in religious rituals and refused to take legal oaths. For the Quakers, everyone had the light of Christ within them. Their beliefs were considered radical, whether on the left or on the right. Okay, so now they, where am I here? Yes, so the Quakers, the Puritans saw them as, these weirdos, and that it was antithetical to especially the Puritans, the Quakers were. Now recall that extremists, whether on the left or the right, are not strange bedfellows in many instances, as we believe. However, the Quakers were not extremists. They might have been viewed as extremists by the Puritans, but they really weren't. Common human decency. That's what the Quakers were all about. And common human decency, as I said before, is often considered radical by right-wing extremists. Now, after the visit of Elizabeth Harris, a Quaker, to Virginia and Maryland in the early 1650s, other Quakers would follow. But it was not an easy road, because they became perhaps the first group to experience America's xenophobic baptismal fire through which most groups had to walk, including Italians and Finns. They used to call the Finns China Suede since then. In July 1656, Mary Fisher and Anne Austen, deemed heretics by the Puritan Massachusetts Bay Colony, were imprisoned in harsh conditions, their books burned, and most of their property confiscated. Convicted of contravening the Puritan law banning Quakers from the colony, 4 Quakers, known as the Boston Martyrs, were hanged, including Mary Dreyer, in 1660, prompting King Charles II to forbid Massachusetts from executing any more Quakers. Could you imagine? Eventually, the Massachusetts charter would be revoked, a royal governor sent to enforce English laws, and the passage of Toleration Act in 1689. Because who would get in their heads to execute Quakers? Imagine that. Quakers, these pacifists, who could do that? The Puritans did. The Quakers would also get some relief when William Penn, member of an aristocratic family who had also been imprisoned, founded the North American Territory of the province of Pennsylvania as a sanctuary for religious freedom and tolerance, with a large land grant from King Charles II in 1681, which was a payment of a debt that Charles II had owed the Penn family back in England. Quakers owned slaves, but by 1758, the Philadelphia Quakers were banned from owning slaves, and by the 1780s, all Quakers were banned from owning slaves. Quakers abolished slavery 85 years before slavery was abolished in the United States of America. It should then come as no surprise that the Quakers were early abolitionists and were very active in the abolition movement. And I will just note here as well that if you took a slave to Pennsylvania, after 6 months you had to free that slave. And so George Washington, he was quite slick, you know. What he would do, every 6 months he would make certain that he crossed state lines and start the clock all over again. He was quite slick, and his past life journey, he was reincarnated in this lifetime, and I discuss that in my book, and you will be shocked to know who he was and how he still repeated the same thing, but in rhyme this time, not verbatim, because he thought he was slick. Anyhow, let's get on with the two faces here. As early as the 1600s then, we begin to see the two faces of America. Over the centuries, many would come to America for many different reasons, including refugees from war, famine, political and religious persecution, and others, all seeking a better life. They wore a vast array, a myriad of masks. By that I mean they were of all, ethnicities and religions and races and colors. Many, like the Quakers, had to go through America's xenophobic baptism of fire. Some lost their lives in that fire. Italians faced the largest mass lynching in American history in New Orleans, and that was near the turn of towards the ending or the beginning, the ending of the 19th century or the beginning of the 20th century. And I can't remember how many, but it was around 11 or more Italians who lived in New Orleans, because most of them came from the southern part of Italy or from Sicily. They tended to be darker, and so they didn't trust them back in New Orleans. They saw them sort of akin to, quote, Negroes, and they thought they were all mafia and what have you. And a sheriff died, and I recount this in my book. A sheriff was killed, and they blamed the Italians. And at trial, they were freed, but the people, the white people, the WASPs, as they would say, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants would not have. They wouldn't agree with that verdict, so they formed a mob. I think it must have been 2,000 people in that mob, but it's detailed in the book. And what they did was they broke into the jail where they were. They shot them, pumped more than 200 shots into them. Then they hanged them. And after they hanged them, then they tore them apart, tore the corpses apart. And they took home they mutilated them. And, with people taking bits and pieces home for souvenirs. That's the largest mass lynching in American history. But of course, we know that most of the people who were lynched were black. There were over 5,000 lynchings, and most of them, of course, were black. But you had, like, for example, a Swedish guy was also lynched, and so was a German guy. A German was also lynched. So all those are detailed in my book. Now, as these new immigrants, as they went through their baptismal fires and survived, they became Americans. Some were ennobled and, like the Quakers, became a part of the face, veering towards the light of the conscience. Others were not ennobled and became the face that denied the light of the conscience, veering towards the darkness. So there you'd see where once upon a time, for example, you'd have the KKK, and it was for white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. Italians, no. Irish, no. Catholics, no. They were not allowed. But then, now, you find Italians and Irish people in the KKK and Catholics, right? So that's how it goes, right? Suffering does not necessarily ennoble. They would also, they who were not ennobled would also join in persecuting new immigrants of different masks. Once again, we do not want to appear judgmental, but use darkness and light, for lack of better terms, right? For lack of better terminology, when I talk about the two faces, one that veers towards the light, the other that veers towards the darkness. Because that face that veered towards the darkness seemed to arrive first, some might say that the real face of America is the one of darkness, that pernicious underbelly. This is the history of America. It is almost an even split with the light, the face of the light. And that's something, having a slight advantage. Now, I love history. I think history is very important. History is the stone that the angel throws to warn us. So if we pay attention to history, we will not keep repeating the same mistakes. And I believe in reincarnation, the truth that it is and its facts. And that is the journey of our soul. So it is the history of the journey of our soul. So whether in the temporal lens or the spiritual lens, history for me is vital. Now I'm gonna just add this here, that as I said, the Quakers were considered fringe. But we will note that after the Nakba, the 1948 Nakba, where over 700,000 Palestinians were ethnically cleansed and displaced, many died, they were put on trails of tears, and I list those in my book as well. They were tossed out, and so they ended up, kicked off their very fruitful farms and out of their homes, and everything taken from them. And so they were sent to the Gaza Strip. Some of them stayed in the Gaza Strip, and there wasn't really nothing there. So, in other words, they are the ones who made the desert bloom, and not, as Golda Meir would say, and other Zionists, that they went to a Palestine that had nothing. They had to make the desert bloom. What a lie. However, that's what supremacist ideology and practices usually do. But let me get back to reading here. Now, we will note that when the Palestinians were dispossessed of their ancestral lands, homes, and livelihood by Zionists and fled to the Gaza Strip, and before the creation of UNRWA was created in 1949, it was the Quakers, right? Through their organization, American Friends Service Committee, and the United Nations also requested their help. They were the ones who set up the shelters, sanitation services, schools, provided food, water, clothing, medical clinics, and other vital services for the displaced Palestinians. It was the Palestinians, as I said, who had to make the desert bloom, and not the Zionists, as Golda Meir and others like to say. The Zionists robbed the Palestinians of what was their blooming, fertile lands and society, and sent them to the desert. And in my book, I have pages of quotes of the founding fathers of Israel and other Zionist leaders in Israel, where they admit in their own words that if they were Palestinians, like, they don't blame the Palestinians if they hate them, because they've come and they've taken their homes, their farms, their crops, their land, and sent them away with nothing. They admit it, and they tell why they do it and how they were going to do it. And I will just add here that sometimes when these displaced Palestinians would attempt to return to harvest something, because they were hungry, something from the crops that they had planted. According to Moshe Dayan, and he was the a former Israeli, and late, he's passed away obviously, defense minister during the time of Golda Meir as well. He wore a patch over his eye. Was that dashing man with a patch over his eye, and he admitted, he said that, and I write here, that sometimes when Palestinians attempted to return to harvest their crops, according to Moshe Dayan, the late former Israeli defense minister, they, the Zionist terrorists, that's what I call them, because it's terrorism. They use terrorism to drive the Palestinians out. The Zionist terrorists would ensure that the Palestinians would return to their tents in the Gaza Strip with at least one limb missing. And as we see, generations later, they did in Gaza with that what I call the human target practice centers that they had acting as aid distribution centers, manned by anti-Muslim mercenaries from America and I guess the IDF, Please see my book for details, Out of the Horse's Mouth. Now, there were fits and starts and never-ending struggles with these two faces. So you have the United Daughters of the Confederacy, the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, the Women of the Invisible Empire, and its different iterations. They change names over the decades. And the myriads of right-wing hate white supremacist groups that dot the American landscape. The companies that were against the New Deal of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, the resurrected corpse of capitalism, which is neoliberalism, the thorn in America's side that are the religious fanatics. It is not only Islam that has fanatics. All organized religious systems do, and America has many, perhaps too many. These are some of the earlier strange bedfellows. We must remember that the makeup of America during those early years, that's what they were. As previously mentioned, many do not realize how deep the influence of religion in corporate America is. The lines of separation are blurred, and it was just completely obliterated when Reagan got into power. As a matter of fact, there are no lines of separation. It's everywhere. Religion is everywhere. So you don't have a secular society. The tax exemption gives them free rein. There is no separation between religion and state and secular society that America purports to be. The power of the religious right and extremists began to grow in earnest since the 1950s and exploded during the 1980s, and the era now seen, I say, through rose-colored rear view mirror of fantasy. That's the 1980s during the Reagan administration. All this fantasy about how great it was. Really? The era when the assault on the education system began in earnest because young people would not drink the Kool-Aid given to them. And I go into great detail as to when that started, when Reagan got that idea in his head. I can't remember his name. I think it was one of his campaign people, when the young people were protesting against the Vietnam Wars, and they thought that, these young people, they're going to school, getting an education, then, we need to dumb down the population and be very discriminate in who we let into higher learning, not just everyone. And so you get the whole student debt thing going, so to block people from becoming educated, because then you will pose questions, right? You won't drink that Kool-Aid so easily. Now, we will now look at certain aspects of that face that veers towards the darkness. As I said, America has been a breeding ground for religious extremism, fringe groups, and cults since the arrival of the first British settlers. There was always this quest for purity. The Pilgrims first left Plymouth, England, for the Netherlands to separate themselves from the Church of England, which they felt was not pure enough for them, as we discussed. After 10 years in the Netherlands, they were on the move again, this time for America aboard the Mayflower, because they did not want their children corrupted in the Netherlands. Yale was founded because some felt that Harvard had lost its purity. Now remember, Harvard is older, about 150 years older than the Republic. And it's the third oldest university in the Americas. The oldest one was in the Dominican Republic. And that's, I tell the story of that one in Haiti and all of that stuff. And the second one, I think, second oldest, I believe, was in Mexico. So Yale was founded because some felt Harvard had lost its purity and had become too liberal. Because neither Harvard nor Yale acknowledged the Great Awakening, New Light Presbyterians established Princeton. With this quest for purity and for some separation and segregation, we see the exclusionary attitude in the English psyche visible in its history in Ireland. And England would continue this exclusionary policy even in India and what have you. I detail that as well in my book. Now, there was also the Eurocentric, white supremacist racism. Puritans were notable for this, as I said before, present with these settlers, and was shown in their attitudes toward the Native Americans, whom they viewed as savages, not even noble savages, but as savages. So it was deemed okay to usurp their lands. Now, racism, for me, was purified, sanctified, and refined in America. Slaves arrived in America before 1619, but they arrived in Jamestown, Virginia in 1619, as I said. Slavery was equal opportunity for all masks since man has been on earth. And that is detailed, the different incidents of slavery all over the world, including in Korea, which had the longest number of years. I think it was like 1,000 years where Koreans were slaves in Korea. So I detail all of that in the book. Slavery was racialized, where you attach now slaves, because all mass, white, black, pink, green, were slaves at some point. But it became attached to black people in Sao Tome, the Portuguese colony of Sao Tome in Africa. Now, we should always also remember, and we always have to remember, that race is fluid, right? I'm black, but what is black? I'm a kaleidoscope of ethnicities and colors and race, actually. So race is fluid. And in America, it is a legal and social construct. This racialization, once again, of slavery was purified, further purified after Sao Tome, sanctified. It became like religion, and still is like religion in America. In other words, while there was and has always been bigotry against one group or other based on some mask since man has been on earth, the masked race became a fine art in America with a two-tier hierarchy of white on top and black at the bottom. With its exclusionary psyche adopted or inherited from its mother Britain, as I said, there was no room for anything in the middle, so the one-drop rule applied. If one drop of black blood should course through one's veins, then you're considered black. And so you have a Sally Hemings, who was the mother of, she was the half-sister of Thomas Jefferson's wife, and she had children with Jefferson. He started sleeping with her from she was a teenager. I think he started sleeping with her when he took her to France. Abigail Adams was the one who actually took her to France while he was there. Now she, for example, her mother was a mulatto. And the father was Jefferson's wife's father. He was white. So Sally Hemings and her brother James, and he has a lovely story, reincarnation-wise. We'll cover that one day. America's first trained chef. Think about macaroni and cheese, meringue, crème brûlée, craft beer. That's James. They would be considered at least 75% white, quadroons, as issues of a mulatto mother and a white father were classified. They were classified as black. So were her children with Jefferson, and they would be more than 75% black if you want to do it that way. That's not exactly how it is done genetically, but you would say that, because here they had a mother who was 75% white and their father, Jefferson, was white. Now, the one-drop rule was meant not only to keep that two-tier racial hierarchy intact, but also to ensure a larger labor force for the plantations and less reliance on a constant resupply of slaves from Africa. Thomas Jefferson, for example, did not think twice about using his own children as slaves. The two-tier hierarchy also helped to keep the many landless, poor white people from ever revolting by making them feel good that there was a group lower on the totem pole than they were, and more than likely not revolt because of their poverty. Because you see, in the end, the poor white man normally has more in common with the poor black man than either of them do with their rich counterparts, but not in America. They could also feel good that they were in the only and same group with the wealthy white people, if only by proximity, because they were in the top tier. Because race is a fluid concept, especially in situations when we try to cubbyhole or pigeonhole race and use precedent and legal definition in what should probably be left to true science with empirical evidence and not pseudo science like eugenics, we run into problems, as in the case of shifting whiteness of different groups like Indians from the subcontinent who were white prior to 1923 but no longer white in 1923, according to the Supreme Court decision. Racism, especially anti-black and eventually anti-brown, as America wanting to extend its slave state into Mexican territory, was social and economic. Slavery was also economic. With the tendency towards purity and extremism, it is little wonder that racism would indeed become purified, refined, and sanctified in America. It took its parental English exclusionary colonialism, as shown earlier, to new heights and has become the poster child, the example for racists and bigots of all kinds throughout the world who desire to organize their countries or societies based on systemic and systematic separation, segregation, and discrimination of ethnic or racial groups. We know that groups throughout history have been ghettoized, right? Forced to live in different parts of towns, villages, or cities. For example, Pope Paul IV did this when on July 14th, 1555, he issued the papal decree Cum Nimis Absurdum, imposing many restrictions on Jews in Rome, including forcing them to live in ghettos, and at least half of the Jewish population died. They being forced to live in that ghetto, and the hygiene was terrible. It was just, the conditions were so awful that a lot of them died. Now, however, America was like none other. America's refinement and purification of racism and prosecution of it, eugenics, its manifest destiny, and consequent treatment and displacement of Native Americans, and its race laws inspired and served as a blueprint, a model for others like Nazi Germany. America provided the blueprint model for Nazi Germany in developing its Nuremberg laws and its policy of Lebensraum. Having space, that's the Native American displacement, right? And that's what Hitler was carrying out. However, some in the upper echelons of the Nazi hierarchy, including jurists, viewed the parts of the American system as not only confusing at times, but also too extreme. Wow, that says something about America, doesn't it? If Nazis thought some of what they did was extreme. Especially that one-drop rule. That says something. Indeed, a glass house. They would say in Jamaica, kettle a cuss pot. The kettle is cursed, is calling the pot black. House on fire. 5-alarm fire when Nazis, the Third Reich, believed the system that advocates the discrimination, right? This is what the Third Reich advocates: discrimination, genocide, displacement, and persecution of groups of its population. And they would believe and think that America was too extreme and went too far. Indeed, America, that face that veers towards the darkness, is indeed a 5-alarm fire. Maybe we'd better put it the 10-alarm fire. Now, it is worthwhile to note that while the Nazis followed the playbook of pre-Nazi Germany, right, the playbook of America, they followed that, right? They had that was a dry run in Namibia, where the Germans, right? What was his name? Von Trapp. I can't remember his name, but he had human fox hunts, right, where you go hunting for Namaqua and Herero people, and human bird shoots. And this is what Israel was having in Gaza, where they'd send people on these safe routes and then they'd hunt them like they're hunting birds, right? Having bird shoots, they just kill them, snipe them, and poison the water wells, which Israel also did in the West Bank as well. And I had predicted that before it happened. When in Namibia, which was the first genocide of the 20th century, right? What they did, those who survived they would put them in concentration camps, and they conducted human experiments on them. And von Sass in Russia did this as well with the Circassians, and I detail all that in the book as well. They conducted the human experiments with many of the Namqua and the Nama and the Herero dying from mutilation, privation, and diseases. And by the time they were released on Kaiser's birthday, 1908, almost 50% of the Nama and up to 75% of the Herero had been killed. And as I said, the first genocide of the 20th century. So for the Nazis, even though they learned a lot from America firsthand, they also had the dry run in Namibia with Germany, right? But then Germany also learned from America, right? What they did also, part of it came from America as well. Now, so Namibia was a dry run for the Nazis as well. Okay, so as previous, and just something to note here, Eugen Fischer was the scientist who conducted the human experiments in Namibia, and eugenics and racial hygiene. Those were some of his experiments in Namibia. He was also the one who had the forced sterilization programs in the Third Reich of mixed race children and young adults. And of course, the mixed race children, they call them the Rhineland bastards. Now, let's get to Hitler's Aryan Paradise now. In America, Hitler saw America as an Aryan paradise. He thought England, Britain, and America were the perfect triumvirate. America was a success story of England, another example of the brilliance of the Aryan race. But a sizable part, the feeling was mutual. With that admiration, it wasn't just Hitler and others who admired America, but there are many Americans, the feeling was mutual, who admired the Nazis. They were Nazi sympathizers. Some cloaked their sympathy in the guise of anti-communism, which of course would not sit well with the religiosity of many Americans, because, communists are coming for your churches. Because in the view of communism, religion is the sigh of the oppressed, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opiate of the people, Karl Marx. Between 1843 and 1844, he wrote that. There were corporations such as Ford, General Motors, Coca-Cola, and anti-Semites like Henry Ford. He was a rabid, a virulent anti-Semite. Charles Lindbergh, also a Detroit priest. Charles Edward Coughlin, with an audience, he had an audience of millions who listened to his broadcasts as he spread Nazi and anti-Semitic propaganda. Charles Edward Coughlin founded the Father Coughlin's Brown Shirts, responsible for brutal assaults on Jews in many American cities. There were groups like the America First Committee. The Nazis are really back, live and direct, and not metaphorically or in rhyme, but verbatim, through the eyes of the soul and the spiritual lens. Truth is stranger than fiction. I will cover that, and that will be interesting in the next video. Comic writers and artists received death threats when Captain America punched a Nazi in the face, but there was no public outrage, with Nazi sympathizers protests and the large Bund rally of 20,000 Nazi sympathizers at Madison Square Gardens on George Washington's birthday, February 20th, 1939, where attendees badly beat Isidore Greenbaum, a plumber's helper who ran on stage and yelled, "Down with Hitler." During the beating, Isidore Greenbaum's clothes were ripped off and the police charged him. They charged the victim with disorderly conduct. You see? Imagine that. In court, according to Daly, a reporter, the judge said, to Greenbaum, "Don't you realize that innocent people might have been killed?" Imagine that judge too. Greenbaum responded, "Don't you realize that plenty of Jewish people might be killed with their persecution up there?" Henry Ford, as I mentioned in my book, was a Nazi sympathizer and virulent anti-Semite who admired and was loved by the Nazis. Once again, Henry Ford, he also perpetuated the propaganda that Jews created jazz to destroy the moral fabric of America. Square dancing, he said, was the true American dance and promoted it as a patriotic dance to be taught in schools. He even gave square dancing lessons, while some schools instituted global fascism and were often cited by the Nazis. This is history. This is nothing new in America. And by the way, square dancing is not a white thing. Square dancing is white, black, and Native American. And I detail the history of square dancing in my book as well. And they did try at one point, and Reagan as well during his administration, but not for long, tried to institute square dancing as the national dance of America. What a ludicrous thing. But anyways, this is nothing new in America. I describe and illustrate the different intersections of these different groups in this face that veers towards the darkness of America in a Venn diagram. And that is to be found in my book. And it's all supremacists, right? Ideology and practices. You see religion, business, greed and profit, racism, all of these different groups from the one face working together, separately and together. Now, let's go, and we are almost finished. The Cyrus Bill of Rights. To counterbalance the ever-growing myriads of miscreants and the extremism in American society, we have the Constitution and Bill of Rights with souls who reincarnated. And I go into that. I will explain that more in the next video. To expiate, advance, and restore their souls. We will discuss these in part 2, as I said. There were amongst those some rescue souls, as well as who accepted the task of safeguarding the Constitution to prevent the chaos and destruction that American society, with the perfect tempest in the teapot, is now enduring. And so we see the fits and starts in the society. There was the 10th president, John Tyler, back in the mid-1800s. He was dubbed His Excellency. He was a strong supporter of the annexation of Texas, states' rights, slavery, and the 1857 Dred Scott decision. He believed that the president had more authority than the Congress and acted in like manner. As secessionist, Tyler is the only president whose death was not officially recognized by Washington. He was buried with the Confederate flag. There were the Civil War and the abolition of slavery, Reconstruction to Jim Crow, civil rights, 1980s, and so forth. To counterbalance this toxicity, and in preparation for this providential moment, through the eyes of the soul, that's why you have the Constitution and Bill of Rights were given to souls, many of whom in reality, in their personal conduct, did not adhere to the ideals. Some slave owners and deeply flawed souls. Those souls who did the Constitution and Bill of Rights, they were on different rungs of the ladder of soul restoration. And at the same time, the first 12 presidents, only 2 of them did not own slaves. The other 10 owned slaves, and that was John Adams, and he was second president, and his son John Quincy Adams was the 6th, I believe. They didn't own slaves. John Adams believed that slavery was that foul contagion in the human spirit. Now, where am I here? All of us are miscreants to a greater or lesser degree, and so it was with the souls who founded the Republic. In the common understanding, these men who did not practice the ideals they espoused were imperfect messengers. Benjamin Banneker, 1631 to 1806, pointed out that hypocrisy in a letter to Thomas Jefferson during the latter's presidency. Benjamin Banneker was a black astronomer, farmer, naturalist, mathematician, mostly self-taught. Using his knowledge of astronomy, he created almanacs and assisted Andrew Ellicott, who I believe was a cousin to George Washington, in the initial survey to establish the borders of the District of Columbia. Accompanying a handwritten copy of his almanac was a letter he wrote to Jefferson in 1791, in which Banneker highlighted the hypocrisy of Jefferson and other American slave owners when Jefferson compared British rule of its colonies to an intolerable state of servitude. Now, Banneker wrote, "How pitiable is it to reflect that although you were so fully convinced of the benevolence of the Father of mankind and of his equal and impartial distribution of those rights and privileges which he had conferred upon them, that you should at the same time be found guilty of that most criminal act which you professedly detested in others with respect to yourselves." Now, the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights serve as a bulwark, and that's how the universe works, to sort of keep the balance. So you have souls coming and they're just awful, and then something will come in to sort of counteract that, and I go into that in the next in the second video of this series. Now, the Constitution and Bill of Rights, as I said, serve as a bulwark against the unbridled greed, racism, hate, and zealotry. It is the light to guide and steer a very flawed society from being overtaken by souls or entities who wore the imprints of some of the worst imprints that miscreants have ever created. Sorry. While apartheid, South Africa, Israel, and Germany learned from the face of the denial of the conscience, the incorrect side of America. There are other countries that have learned from the face tending towards the light of the conscience, the correct side of America, and have used the principles, the values espoused by that side as a model for their democracies. Once again, these two faces of America are antithetical to each other. One face is the Jim Crow system of segregation and systemic discrimination and lack of freedom, authoritarianism, hate, covetousness, grift, grievance, and greed. The 3 G's I call them. I say America doesn't have to worry about the 5 G's. They ought to worry about the 3 G's. Greed, grift, and grievance. That's what's running their country now. And the other face is the one that espouses that freedom, inclusion, and democracy and common human decency. Once again, the Jim Crow system is the denial of the conscience, the light of the conscience hidden. And the other face, that of the light of the conscience in full view. How can this be? This makes for a schizophrenic society that gives its citizens frequent whiplash. A society which hands are not steady on the steering wheel. As America embarks on its Buttonesque journey, like Benjamin Button, it has increasingly become such a society that partners and allies cannot trust, because from election to election there is whiplash. It is unreliable. We recall that its slave vestige electoral system has gone so out of balance. It's never been one man, one vote. Don't be fooled by that. That the minority, that is the destructive side, now controls the ultimate check and balance of the republic. That is the Supreme Court. If this journey doesn't come to a sudden stop, there will be total darkness, and the republic will most certainly die. And I'm going to add something here, and we're just about done. The entity that is Barack Obama was not a fluke. And he didn't cause a backlash, no. He was not a fluke. He was an entity that served to bring into full light and contrast the pernicious underbelly of more than 40% of America. His presidency served to rip the scab off an ulcer that needed to debride, to give it a chance to properly heal once the right medicines are administered. So, once again, what came after the 44th president, Barack Obama, was not a backlash. It was the sunlight. That presidency also served to show the face that is the light of America's two faces, and that it is possible to strive towards that face. And that's the end of video number 1. I thank you for watching this video. It's been long. Didn't think it would be, because I get off track and I have to add little stuff other than just reading. Please do not forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share. And as usual, I will end with this. All my videos will end with this. Hate, hitching a ride. Hate, a contagion. A cancer, metastasizing. An opportunistic bacteria, the cloud waiting to block the sun. Hate, waiting to hitch a ride on the train of love. Hate, the rat on its rat passage. Hate, a ride on the boat to the plague. Hate, the bedbug waiting for a suitcase. Hate, the roach riding on our coattails. Hate, the shadow always lurking behind, sometimes longer than us. Just lurking behind the thin curtain, waiting for its turn on center stage to take us to a place not so far away. A blast back from civilization to barbarism, from knowledge back to ignorance, from wisdom back to imprudence. Hate never takes a holiday, always looking for the opportunity to hitch a ride on the train of love. Hate inhabits the same house as love within us. None of us is without blemish. God the Creator, that's something that is greater than us, has no chosen few. He bequeaths unto none of us lands or special places on this earth. That something that is greater than us would be short-sighted, cynical, and cruel to bequeath unto any of us lands, because seas and oceans rise, cover, they drown lands. Volcanoes erupt and cover lands with lava, and earthquakes swallow us and our belongings. No, do not believe anyone who feeds you that Kool-Aid. We cannot fight for and on behalf of that something that is greater than us. He doesn't need that. He doesn't need us to do that. That is arrogance at its height if we believe that. We're all tenants on this earth, not here to have dominion or to rule anything or anyone. We're not here to have dominion over the fowl of the air. No. The fish in the sea, or the beasts on the fields or in the fields. We're not here to rule and have supremacy over our brothers. Let us be good tenants. Let us take care of ourselves and each other. Let us trod ever so lightly and take care of this planet we call Earth and all the creatures that dwell thereon. Remember that there is something greater than us. That is the fatherhood of God. Remember that we respect and show our love for that something that is greater than us by taking care of ourselves, our brothers, and the planet. May we never try to free our conscience so that we will always do correct actions. May we learn to walk a mile in our brother's shoes so that we can see the humanity in each other. May we respect the differences in each other and know that our Creator has no chosen few. May we find comfort in the knowledge that each of us is slated for redemption. Sorry, none is excluded. May we find solace in the knowledge that it is not a question of if, but one of when. Each of us shall return to our Father. May we know that we are just tenants on this earth and take care of each other, the earth and all the creatures that dwell thereon. May we always adhere to the principles of the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, doing unto others as we would have them. My guide says, them not others, do unto us. Love. May we know that which I do unto my brother, I do unto myself, for I am my brother's keeper. May the tiny shrouds of light forever illuminate our path through the dark. May peace forever reside within us and between us. One divine, universal love.